All right, 3, 2, 1. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. We recorded our first show on this general subject on February 21st, 2020. The title of that show was Researcher Herb Smith on the Iran-Mena-Contra operation. So this will be a part two. We're going to cover topics that are also involved in that whole situation. So, Herb Smith, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Awesome.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for agreeing to these interview and interesting times. So, today is April 4th, so 2020. So we're kind of right in the thick of the whole lockdown. But if you want to just kind of pick up where we left off, Herb, that'd be great, and we can cover some of these topics.
Yeah, so in the last conversation, we talked about the drug running as part of the Iran-Contra affair in Arkansas. And I think what we're going to talk about today is one of the consequences of that is the what's called the boys on the tracks, when they found two young men, Kevin Ives and Don Henry, were found dead on train tracks in August of 1987, and they were laid down soldier style, and it's still investigations supposedly from the FBI are still continuing to this day, and this case hasn't died, as we mentioned in the last episode. The wrestler from the WWF, Billy Jack Haynes, has said he was involved. So he said that in like 2016, I believe, and it's still getting some legs even today. With Doc Washburn, who I believe has a radio show in Arkansas, and there's a YouTube channel called Hannibal TV, which is as a wrestling site, and they've interviewed him as well, just fairly recently.
And there's also been other podcasts that have just covered the boys on the tracks as kind of a mystery, murder, true crime story. So it's still recent, and I think Sean Atwood just put out a book, and he's been around the Epstein case and things like that. And the title of his book is Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies: From the Boys on the Tracks to Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, it even goes into Jeffrey Epstein, huh?
Yeah, so I think he added Epstein into that book that he had pre-written, but he's very familiar with the Clinton crimes and was covering that, and then Epstein, kind of blew up.
Yeah, I mean, it still hasn't gone away, that's for sure.
No, Epstein is still relevant, but Boys on the Tracks is relevant. You're right, it's still current, and I think that the mother is still people are still in contact with her, and there's still the search for justice.
Yeah, it'd be a good time to mention there's a site with the mother, Linda Ives, and Jean Duffy, who was she was on the drug task force in Arkansas, and they have put a site together called idfiles.com, where you can find a lot of information, some legal information, and just general information about the case, and also again legal documents and a listing of people involved and that sort of thing. So it's definitely would be the best site for anybody to go to learn more about it.
And so just to go through the details, can you talk about, for people who haven't heard of this case, about what happened, the specifics of the boys on what's now called the Boys on the Tracks?
Yeah. So again, so this was in August of 1987 when two boys were found dead on railroad tracks, and so they were run over probably about 4:30 in the morning, they figure, and these boys had gone out hunting earlier late at night, and so what they did is the first problem, I think, is they treated it as an accident rather than a suspicious death and homicide. And so the sheriff treated it as an accident, and then a big part of the cover-up would be the medical examiner, Fahmy Malik.
Right, the notorious, right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, he had Clinton's mother was a nurse anesthetist, and she had two cases where people under her care died, and she was accused of negligence, and they had investigations, and it was Malik who cleared her both times. So, of course,
Right, and he had
so
also, I think he like one guy's body who was found in a dump in pieces. He's claimed he committed suicide. There were all of these outrageous conclusions that came out of the medical examiner's office.
yeah, there was actually a citizens group called Vomit, Victims of Malik's Incredible Testimony. So he was just notorious for. I think one of the Arkansas newspapers had like a week long investigation into some of the the crazy findings he had done. So it was Malik who originally said he changed it quite a few times, but first he wanted to say it was an accidental suicide, and then the parents weren't going to accept that, and then he tried to say it was marijuana intoxication, and then he even tried to say the conductors didn't stop the train on time, and then he should have said maybe they were taking marijuana. Like this guy is like just
The story changed over and over.
Yeah.
If you have a window open in the background, can you close that? Because I keep hearing a semi rolling by.
Okay, hold on. Sorry about that. Let's see here. Is that better?
I don't know, as long as I don't hear the noise of something rolling by in the background.
Okay, yeah. I didn't hear it. All right.
Okay, because I keep hearing a car or something driving by.
Sorry. That's yeah. I can't really.
Okay.
I can't really. Sometimes it's just my street and where my computer is. Hopefully, it won't be too bad. I'm not sure how to. The windows are closed.
Okay.
It's just my car.
So, but go the specifics. What were the boys' name? It was Don Ives, and they were like 17 years old, right?
Kevin Ives and Don Henry,
That's
and they were like 16 and 17 years old.
But from their point of view, there wasn't the allegation that they were out looking for a drug drop, right?
There might. They were supposed. They had a rifle with them, so they're supposed to be going out deer hunting. Now, whether some kid, there were apparently another group of kids out nearby as well. So whether they heard something and were investigating, I'm not sure.
I mean, because what's the real rationale of somebody, committing murder on these two boys, right? Like, there was no evidence that there was money taken or anything like that, right?
No. What Malik tried to say was they were smoking dope and fell asleep on the train track side by side, soldier style in the same same identical poses, but so there was that's what they tried to say was marijuana intoxication was an accident. They tried to say it was an accident. Basically, they couldn't admit to a murder because what had happened. The conclusion is that they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and there were people on the tracks at the time. People there waiting for the drug drop, and they saw them, and then they took off, and they were caught at a grocery store and brought back.
Oh, I see.
So there are witnesses that saw two cops take them and possibly knock them out at the grocery store. So that's what happened. So they had run away, but they were apprehended like they did something wrong. They were caught by the cops, and there were witnesses to that as well at the grocery store, and then they were brought back.
Right. So that motorcycle just came through. Wasn't there some element or allegation or suspicion that they intended to go to that drug drop, or that they knew that the drug drops were taking place? Did you ever read anything about that?
No, I haven't seen anything about that. Have you?
I thought I read that a while back. I followed all the Clinton stuff that came out of Arkansas with great detail, so I remember the case. But I thought that they were kind of there that there had been drug drops missing, and that was the motivation to off the two boys as an example, that they thought they might have done something in the past. and that the deer hunting was just a cover.
I hadn't heard that, but I know you mentioned, well, Billy Jack Haynes had said that he was, whether he was there or not, I'm not sure. Some people, like even Gene Duffy doesn't think he was, and Linda Ives isn't sure. But according to Billy Jack Haynes, the whole reason he was there was because to they thought a couple of cops had been stealing money or drugs from the drug drops.
Gotcha. Right. There was
So that's
something
how
like that.
right. So that's how Billy. So there, according to Billy Jack Haynes, there were allegations of people stealing from those drug drops, and they thought it was the cops. They thought it was some local policeman.
Interesting. But wasn't there an autopsy that indicated at least one of the boys was stabbed?
Yes. So then you had Don Henry was stabbed twice in the back, and Kevin Ives was apparently hit with the butt of a rifle, and so they were, and of course Fahmy Malek had somehow missed that, which is, I mean that
It wouldn't be the first time. The more I read about some of these criminal cases, these medical examiners just don't care about certain facts. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely starts right there, because why would Malik rule that if he wasn't under some type of pressure? Certainly, he wouldn't have taken it upon himself to issue an outrageous ruling like that if there wasn't something else behind him.
Right.
I mean, he had to have known. There's no way you would just do something like that on your own. And obviously, you can't miss. You could not have missed that one was stabbed, and one, his face was disfigured, and in the blood, their lungs. And so when, of course, the families didn't accept it, and that's when they got the bodies exhumed, and then they got the autopsies which showed the stab marks and the injury to Kevin Ives' head, or back of the head, with what they figure is like the butt of a rifle.
Gotcha. Right. So showed evidence of some type of torture and assault
Yeah.
before the train. And so then what happened after that? I mean, it's been a long kind of saga, hasn't it?
Yeah, so it took them, I believe, another year before they got the bodies exhumed. And so in '88, they started, they actually were able to get a grand jury hearings into their deaths. But the first problem with that is the grand jury, it was basically run by Richard Garrett and Dan Harmon. And Dan Harmon, Dan Harmon told Linda Ives and probably the Don Henry's parents that they were going to solve this case. Well, it turns out that Dan Harmon was there that night on the tracks.
Oh, wow. Right.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
there's two witnesses that put him in. I think Billy Jack Haynes also. Again, some people aren't sure about him or not, but there's like three witnesses that put Dan Harmon. If you include Billy Jack Haynes, there are three witnesses that put Dan Harmon at the scene of the crime. So I guess it only makes sense. He's the guy that pretty much steered the grand jury investigations, and that's when people started showing up dead during the grand jury investigations as well.
Okay, and who died? Who died during the investigation?
There were 8 deaths, if I could find it for there. At least eight deaths happened like during the grand jury investigations or shortly thereafter. I can, if you want me to.
Yeah, if you can look into that. Wasn't Harmon kind of part of the Clinton network? I thought he ended up going to jail.
Yes, he did. He first, when he was a prosecutor, he became prosecutor, and he first in like '91 he had a tax evasion suit against him, and he had spent 18 days in jail because he wouldn't take a drug test. But then later on, in the '90s, I think 1996, he had racketeering, extortion, and drug charges, and he was sentenced to 10 years, and he served 9. And then when he got out, he got in trouble again with more drug charges.
Yeah, he just couldn't stop. Yeah.
Yeah, he can't. He looks like if you look at him on the ID files page, at least the picture in 2018, he almost looks like a homeless guy. He's really fallen on hard times. It's in one way it's kind of surprising that you would have an operation like this and have a guy that's just so so damaged. And I'm kind of surprised he's still alive actually, because I don't know, he just seems like that's not the type of guy that really needs to be around. He's a loose cannon. He's just not a guy that, you know. You just think some of the guys, you know, some people have done better under this. He's one guy that did not fare well. Initially he did, you know, but he did not fare well after this. And he's just kind of out there on his own. I'm like, you know, like a drifter practically, it seems.
Right.
Like.
Well, what in 3 years from they died in 87, the Clintons became, Bill Clinton was president in 92, right?
Right.
And when was he last governor? What, didn't he go from the governorship right into the presidency? See?
Yeah, I believe so.
Right, yeah.
So, and then he fired quite a few judges when he became governor, or president. So he had, you know, you had Bush initially, and then you had Clinton. You know, two of the people that are probably the biggest hand in the Iran-Contra Mena affair,
right.
And they were both presidents. So, and one of the things. So the investigation, the grand jury investigation into their death, did rule that their deaths were murder.
Gotcha.
So that did actually rule, but then they wouldn't. I mean, you're a lawyer, you know more about it than I would. But apparently, their findings, they weren't allowed to present their findings publicly, as far as the investigation.
Right.
So, yeah, like I said, there are quite a few deaths. Some of the deaths around that would be kids that were witnesses. So there's more kids that died. Missing bodies. I believe a couple of people that were supposed to testify before the grand jury. So, like, let's say that there were at least 8 deaths, if not right during the grand jury proceedings, like a little shortly thereafter as well.
And how long did the grand jury take? Do you know when their final ruling was made? Do you have a date on that?
Yeah, I have the date here. It was in 88 when they, so they convened at the end of April of 88. And then, let's give me 1 second here. Looks like sometime in later on in 88.
So they were done within a year. That's interesting. So yeah, they made that conclusion.
I think it was like possibly 4 to 8. I think it's like 8 months, if I remember correctly. So yeah, and during that time, quite a few people died, including witnesses, let's say kids, other kids. It's just crazy what they did to these poor, just kids. They're kids that told their parents that they knew things, and they ended up dead. In addition to, again, the boys on the tracks.
And of course, nobody ever has been prosecuted to this day. So it's been, over 30 years. Did you read Mara Leverett's book, Boys on the Tracks?
No, I didn't. It was always out of print, and I couldn't get to it. And then actually, I know when you said, and I know it was a good book, but when she wrote something about the Ark and what is that?
West Memphis 3, Devil's Knot.
West Memphis 3.
Yeah, Devil's Knot.
And you've told me about it, and I followed you, and I knew you weren't happy with what she wrote about it, so that kind of discouraged me a little bit from getting her book, and it was hard to find as it was anyway. It was out of print, and then who had a lot of those books actually was Victor Thorne on his site, and then
interesting.
When he died, I couldn't get it anyway from his site. That's where I got a lot of my books I had gotten from his site.
And he was either murdered or committed suicide 2016, and that was during the whole election cycle.
Yeah.
But he looked into everything about the Clintons. He knew so much about all their stuff, not just the Boys in the Tracks, right?
Right. Yeah. Like I say, he had 3 volumes of books on Hillary and Bill, because that was during the. Actually, I think he wrote that. Let me say, I think it was during the first. It wasn't for. Okay, he wrote it in 2008 when Hillary was running the first time.
Right.
So those books, and he had it in sex, drugs, and murder. So he had a whole chapter on the boys on the tracks.
Right. So he knew everything. I mean, I think he knew. He had the volume 1 sex, volume 2 was drugs, and then murder. Right. Yeah. That was
Right.
volume 3. So those are very well selling books too. I mean, that guy was very. He's very prolific. He wrote tons of books.
Yeah, he really did. He wrote a lot. The Clinton books are pretty. He uses a lot of mainstream sources in the Clinton books.
Interesting.
It's heavily sourced. So, yeah, he's got quite a bit on the deaths and all the deaths and the whole Clinton body count, which Mena is part of.
Sure. I mean, it goes all the way back to the 80s, if not 70s. You know.
Right. So, so we had the prosecutor Dan Harmon, who was involved, in the murders on the tracks that night. As far as like Billy Jack Haynes, he knew all the names. I have to say, I think he knew them. I don't know if he was there that night. Like Gene Duffy doesn't seem to think so. But when I listened to him talk on the Doc Washburn show and the Hannibal TV, he rattles off names like it's not. I don't get the feeling he just researched it. I get the feeling he met those people because he just knows it. He knows Dan Harmon, another guy involved is Richard Garrett, and I mentioned Richard Garrett. He knew about Keith McCaskill, who ended up being murdered. That was the only murder that was solved, allegedly, at least. One guy had done 10 years for his murder. Keith McCaskill was on the tracks that night. There's a couple of conflicting stories about whether he was there originally or whether he actually was told when at the grocery store and then went there after. According to one witness, he actually stabbed Don Henry.
Interesting.
And which is kind of weird about Keith McCaskill is that he went to Richard Garrett, and then he found out he went to the wrong. He went to Richard Garrett, who was conducting the grand jury investigation, and then he told people he was going to die, and he went to the wrong person. Now I don't know why, if he was on the tracks that night and he knew Dan Harmon. Apparently, Dan Harmon and Richard Garrett, they worked hand in hand. I don't know. I'm surprised he wouldn't know their affiliation. There's a couple weird. I find that Keith McCaskill thing a little odd. But another thing about all those deaths were happening during the grand jury investigation, and according to Harmon and Garrett, they had no relation to the murder investigation of Henry and Ives.
Gotcha.
So they basically had all these. McCaskill was the only out of those 8 deaths. McCaskill's was the only one that was solved.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
but
they were all unrelated, according to the prosecutors.
Sure. I mean, that sounds like the standard story that would come out of Arkansas at that time. I mean, you had some of the security detail. A lot of those guys died. A lot of those guys said, I'm going to get killed, and ended up dying. There was all kinds of dark actors and things going on in Arkansas at that time. This is incredible. What do you think? What is your opinion of what happened that night when the boys were murdered?
I think it was like we pretty much said, that they came across a drug drop, and not only did they come across it, they came across it when the people were that when you had cops and Harmon when they were there to receive the shipment, and they didn't want witnesses. They were chased. They were knocked out, apparently, and brought back and murdered, and to make it look like an accident. And of course the reason it's not solved is because it's tied into the Iran-Contra affair and Mena
Right. So
and
everybody
Bush.
gets the message, right? Like this
Right.
is
There's just, and people have said, even, I guess, even high-ranking officials, like even a sheriff said, do you want to bring down the president over this?
interesting.
So any other way, it would have been solved, I'm sure. So the names that, I don't know if did I mention the names of the cops, two of the cops that they believe were involved was one with Kirk Lane and uh, Jay Campbell, the other one's name is. And now what's Kirk Lane is like a drug czar in Arkansas now. He was appointed by, who we mentioned the last time, Asa Hutchinson,
Right.
who was the attorney general at that time, and now he's the governor. Jay Campbell has been, like Dan Harmon, he's been arrested for drug charges as well. So those were the two cops they believe were involved. According to Charlene Wilson, who was there that night, and even now, what's funny is, okay, Charlene Wilson was like a former girlfriend of Dan Harmon and Roger Clinton, apparently.
Right.
And she testified. She testified in 1990. They had again. They had also investigations into drug activity in Arkansas, unrelated to the boys in the tracks at that time. And so Gene Duffy brought Charlene Wilson to testify in front of the grand jury, and she mentioned the Clintons, and she was also, there's a video called "Obstruction of Justice" that features Linda Ives and it's all on the story of the boys on the tracks, and that was done in that film was a documentary in 1996. Well, unbeknownst to anybody involved, she actually confessed in 1993. And that wasn't found for like another 23 years or so till Linda Ives actually had seen her written confession, but she never mentioned that to the film producers at the time. But when she testified, so what they seem to do is they do investigations and then they shut them down.
Right. I mean, this is actually quite standard. It's not that unusual. These investigations are meant to fail or be subverted or undercut, with full knowledge of a lot of people.
Is it partly just to see who comes forward and to see who has what information on what? Because that's what it seems to be.
Yeah, it's like trailing.
They let them testify and then they shut them down.
Yeah, they want to see what people know. They have all the information. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So when she testified, Gene Duffy, who I mentioned, she was the drug task. She was in the drug task force. She was the head of drug task force. And so when she started, her boss told her, don't use this to investigate public officials. And she quickly found what happened is one of her undercover agents told her that so they had known that there was a lot of drug activity in Arkansas, not necessarily related to the boys in the tracks. And so, but then one of her undercover investigators said the drug activity was involved in the deaths of Kevin Ives and Don Henry, and it was solvable. So at the same time, because her boss told her don't use it to investigate public officials, she knew about an investigation that was going on into the drug activities of a federal investigation into the drug activities of Arkansas officials. So she didn't go to her boss because she thought when he told her don't use it for public officials that he might have involved as well. So she went to a Bob Gover, his name was Bob Gover, who had memorandums linking Harmon and Richard and Garrett to drug activities. So when she had her informant Charlene Wilson at the time, she hadn't confessed, but she was an informant and went and talked about the drug activity. And what happened is the boss, Chuck Banks, after she gave that testimony, then the boss shut down the investigation and cleared Garrett and Harmon. So there's another case of They do an investigation and then they just shut it down. Again, like you said, just to see who knows what. And
Yeah, the state is criminal. The state itself has criminals just operating it. Um, did you get a feel for how many people who were there that night? Because it doesn't seem like it was a small amount. It seems for that drug drop, there must have been, other than the two boys, a significant amount of people.
yeah, the names that come up now are the cops Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane. Of course, what's his Dan Harmon. There was also another cop, I think, Danny Allen was his name. He doesn't figure as perhaps his name comes up, not necessarily involved in the murder. According to Billy Jack Haynes, the sheriff James Steed was there as well. And Keith McCaskill. So
Gotcha.
I mean, there's like about 5 or 6 there or so.
Yeah, at least known parties, right?
Right, and Charlene Wilson also, as well. She testified. I said, she testified that she said it wasn't deep, but she said she actually stabbed one of the boys.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe 7 or 8 people were there, and there was also apparently a separate group of kids, and one of them, his name was I think he's deceased now, but his name was Tommy Nyhouse. He's also a witness to the murders and Dan Harmon being on the tracks. So, like I say, maybe there were people who were just out and about, or did some people have heard about drug drops? Possibly, I don't know, but there looks like another separate group of boys nearby as well.
Interesting. So, I mean, it's not that uncommon, honestly. Kids are curious, young boys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember growing up in Northern California. People knew who were growing. People knew suspicious stuff was going on.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's kind of my sense too. At least not necessarily that they were trying to get anything, but they might have heard of something going on. I guess word would get around for that, and when you're a kid, you want to see stuff like that.
yeah, you're curious of what's going on.
Yeah.
So let's go, if we can go back to this new allegation by this wrestling guy about his involvement. Can you talk in detail about that and whether he has anything credible that would lend credence to his claims of him being there?
Yeah. So according to him, well, it is pretty much a fact that he was a drug dealer. He was out of Oregon, and he had been dealing drugs, according to him, since like I think he said even 1977. So he'd been doing some drugs. He said he worked his way up the ranks. He said he provided drugs to cocaine to other wrestlers, and he said through moving up the ranks, he became involved with Barry Seal. And Barry Seal has ended up what got him involved with Bill Clinton and the Iran-Contra affair in Mena, Arkansas. That's according to Billy Jack Haynes.
Right. So Billy Jack Haynes is the guy's name, right?
Right.
That's right.
And then he was of course all wrestlers are, even as a wrestler, he was considered a pretty tough guy. He was about 260, 270. He was a tough guy. So he was a bad guy. By his own admission, he was a pretty bad guy. So I don't think there's any doubt that he was involved in drugs. Then he said, now a couple things that according to him, I believe he had contact with Clinton 3 times. Whether Clinton would get that involved, I'm not sure, but he did rattle off all the names he said at the Rose Law Firm. He met all those guys, and he'd say their names like he knew them. Like the Sheriff James Steed, he mentioned Jay Campbell, Kirk Lane, Richard Garrett, Keith McCaskill, like Dan Harmon. Like he knew all those guys, and I just didn't get the sense. I didn't get the sense that he learned that just by reading it up on the internet.
Interesting.
Granted, a lot of what he said was public knowledge. Anything he could find out what we could find out, but I just don't. I do get the sense that he's credible than that. I really do believe he's met these guys. If he wasn't on the tracks, I'm not sure. Again, Gene Duffy is really skeptical about it, but I definitely feel that he knew those people. I think he was involved in some capacity. That I really do think that, and he did go to meet Linda Ives. Now, would a guy that wasn't involved do that? Like, even being a wrestler, you're going to meet the parents, or the mother, or the parents of someone whose death you were involved in. I mean, that's pretty gutsy if you're not involved in it. It's gutsy if you are, let alone if you're not. I don't know what he would stand to gain from doing something like that.
What did Ives? Do you know what the mother thought about her meeting with him?
There are pictures of them together. So I think initially, I get the sense that she definitely wanted to hear from him and find out more. But I think as time went on, I think she's more skeptical now. And certainly Gene Duffy is, and they work together. So I think if one is, the other one would be. And now one thing that
go ahead.
Kind of about it, one thing that, like, a little bit, I think, is, so the reason Billy Jack Haynes ended up on the tracks was because he was supposed to, again, I think I mentioned, they thought cops were stealing either money or drugs from the shipments, and Billy Jack Haynes was there to kill them.
I see. Gotcha.
Now, what's kind of funny about that, so he had a match like a few days before, wrestling match, and he got a note saying there was an emergency he had to call about his father, I believe. And it turns out it was about going there to take care of the cops that they thought were stealing the shipments. Now, according to Haynes, he said Bill Clinton contacted him personally. It was like he got a note, and he called Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton's the one that told him what he had to do, and he contracted him for $50,000. I don't know, but I find it. I just don't think that these guys, like Bill Clinton, would personally do it myself.
It seems odd that he would want to even have a face-to-face conversation with somebody like that.
Exactly. So they could be why they're suspicious of Haynes a little bit, and I don't know. Again, I'm not saying for sure that he's lying, but things like that. See, those guys have they always keep plausible deniability. They don't get involved as much in the day-to-day operations, and in that regard, that seems a little odd to me.
Yeah.
Again,
Seems odd. Do you know if Billy Jack Haynes, was he involved in any other criminality? Did he ever get arrested, or was he involved? I mean, you said he was involved in drugs, but did he ever get arrested for anything or spend time in jail?
No, not that I know of. But he, according to him, he's beaten some people up. He said he's done some bad things, but he never was arrested for it, to my knowledge, and he never said anything. Apparently, got away with the drugs as well. He had his issues with. He sued the WWE for the CTE, and I think he got a settlement there. But yeah, I don't think he was ever arrested.
Interesting. Well, go continue.
Anyway, yeah, that's about it for that. And again, like I say, it just seems the MO was to start investigations and then shut them down. It's still the FBI. I got a couple minutes still, right? The FBI had the FBI was like the FBI had an ongoing investigation. In '94, they contacted Gene Duffy, who had actually been run out of town by Dan Harmon. But when Dan Harmon, when the FBI cleared her, she came back to Arkansas, and the FBI was doing an investigation into the deaths of the boys in the tracks. And when Gene Duffy got involved, then in '95 again the FBI shut it down and said there was they told Linda Ives you're going to have to consider that no crime was committed. So there's another case of starting investigation, shutting it down.
Right, at the federal level, right? So the FBI
Right.
is involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to this day, now Linda Ives has filed Freedom of Information Act to. There's the Department of Justice, the FBI. They've all done these investigations into it, and then they say there was no crime committed, but in the meantime, they also say it's an ongoing investigation, and that's their justification for not giving Linda Ives the documents she's requesting.
Right, so it contradicts it, right? So they accept the conclusion of Fahmy Malek, but then also say it's still under investigation.
It's still open, right. So it seems like they cover all their bases.
And that story was suppressed as well. The Boys on the Tracks. It was never really a national story, if my memory serves me correct. You kind of had to dig through. I mean, this is me looking into it in the '90s. You kind of had to dig through the Clinton stuff to find out about it. Wasn't that well? Not as well known as it is now, at least in my understanding. But the Clintons, you got to remember, they're the ones in power, 92 to 2000, right? So, right. And after Vince Foster got murdered, the next day they got a new head of the FBI. You know. So.
And again, like we mentioned too, when this was going on with Reagan and Bush were in power. Reagan and Bush were in power.
Right.
From
80 to 92, right?
Bush would be like, what would Bush be? 88 to 92.
Well, yeah, as president, sure.
Right. But yeah. So again, because it was really centered around the Iran-Contra affair. Like, it's not going to go anywhere when Bush is involved, and it's not going to go anywhere where Clinton's involved, and it's not going anywhere with Obama and president. It's not going anywhere where Trump is the president either. So, right. But again, according to the FBI, they can't give documents to Linda Ives because the investigation is still ongoing, even though they also told her no crime was committed.
Right, that's disgusting. It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that FBI kind of corruption isn't new. I mean, I wasn't. Yeah, yeah, it's incredible. They get. I mean, the FBI, the way the FBI actually really functions, the public, certain parts of it, the public would probably be terrified if they knew how it really worked.
Yeah, I've heard someone say there's something going on, like say the Joe Paterno case. Or the Penn State case, that Joe Paterno might at least look the other way, and then the FBI got involved. When there's like an outcry, it seems like when the FBI is really there to cover things up, if it's a big case, they're not necessary to investigate things as they are again to find out who knows what, and then cover it up. It's not the FBI you used to see on TV.
No, that's very well said. So true. Is there anything before we wrap up you'd like to add? Anything I missed? Anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, I'd just like to tell people again, if you want to learn more about it, idfiles.com, obstruction of justice, and there's a channel called Carnage on Ice that he's done some good work on it as well, and I think he's got a 4-hour documentary on Barry Seal. I haven't seen that one yet. But again, that channel is Carnage on Ice, and the guy that did that film and also did films on the Boys on the Tracks, I think he's also on that idfiles.com website as well.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Again, it is Herb Smith, and tonight we discussed the murder case of 2 young men known as the Boys on the Tracks. So thank you very much, Herb Smith.
Thanks for having me.